Hi there. My name is Dave Seaweed. I'm the Indigenous Coordinator at Douglas College. I'm Kwakiutl, born and raised in East Vancouver. I would like to acknowledge that I'm sharing with you today on the Kakite First Nation, the New Westminster Band, and thank Chief Rhonda Larrabee for supporting our work here. As is my understanding, the word Vancouver Festival is spread throughout the Lower Mainland, and so would also like to acknowledge Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Coquitlam nations. We acknowledge that we are on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, where we live, we learn, we play, and we do our work.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Nish, Executive Director of Word Vancouver. I'd like to welcome you to this year's festival. We are so excited by the programming. We hope you enjoy yourself. I also want to thank our whole team, our board, all our sponsors and partners, and all of the supporters. Enjoy.
Good evening and welcome to Word Vancouver. My name is Taslim Jaffer. I'm a freelance writer and a writing instructor, and I am so honored to be rounding out this fabulous festival this evening with our guest, Omar Mouallem. Many hours were put into the programming, and I would just like to thank all the staff and volunteers at Word Vancouver for putting in all these hours into this program that is diverse, educational, and entertaining. We would like to acknowledge that this festival takes place on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I am joining you from the unceded traditional territories of the Kwantlen, Katsi, and Semiahmoo nations. We offer our gratitude to the First Nations for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations. May we honor their teachings. Word Vancouver would like to take a moment to thank our generous donors and sponsors: the Canada Arts Council, the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Heritage Fund, Canada Periodical Fund, the BC Arts Council, BC Gaming, Creative BC, the City of Vancouver, DBVIA, the Joseph Wask Family Foundation, the Chris Spencer Foundation, the Hamber Foundation, the Asian Canadian Writers Workshop, and CWILL. For a full list of our partners, please visit our website. Without you, this free festival could not be possible. And if you haven't already, please consider making a donation through the silent auction or through the Adore an Author campaign. All the information is in the chat. And a special initiative. Word Vancouver is offering a giveaway of books. At the beginning and at the end of the events that took place from September 16th through this one, the host for each event gave a special word to the audience. So all you have to do is collect all those words and email them to wordvancouver.info@gmail.com. So if you missed any of the events, you can always go back to the Word Vancouver YouTube channel or the Facebook page and find the words, make your list, and send them in. The word for this event is identity. Okay, so you can see us, but we can't see you. However, we would love to see your comments in the chat. So feel free to show your appreciation there, and also drop any questions that you might have for Omar as we move through the hour. There will be time to respond to your questions, and this is your opportunity to ask them. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our guest, Omar Mouallem. Omar is an award-winning writer and filmmaker. He's reported on Muslim and Middle Eastern issues for The Guardian, The Ringer, and Wired, authored the newly released book, Praying to the West, How Muslims Shaped the Americas, from Simon & Schuster, and directed The Last Baron, a documentary about the unlikely connection between the Lebanese Civil War and a rogue burger chain. In 2020, he founded Pandemic University School of Writing, a virtual school in support of writers affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. He lives in Edmonton, Alberta with his family. Follow him on Twitter at Omar Mouallem and find him at omarmouallem.com. Welcome, Omar.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well,
we're
happy
we're closing up WordFest.
Yes, we are.
Or Word Vancouver.
Word Vancouver. And we're happy that you can kick off your book tour with us tonight.
That's right.
Yeah, you're just getting started.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So before we jump into our conversation, I just want to read for everybody about your book. Okay, this is from the Simon & Schuster website. Omar Mouallem grew up in a Muslim household, but always questioned the role of Islam in his life. As an adult, he used his voice to criticize what he saw as the harms of organized religion, but none of that changed the way the others saw him. Now, as a father, he fears the challenges his children will no doubt face as Western nations become increasingly nativist and hostile toward their heritage. In Praying to the West, Mouallem explores the unknown history of Islam across the Americas, traveling to 13 unique mosques in search of an answer to how this religion has survived and thrived so far from the place of its origin. From California to Quebec, and from Brazil to Canada's icy north, he meets the members of fascinating communities, all of whom provide different perspectives on what it means to be Muslim. Along this journey, he comes to understand that Islam has played a fascinating role in how the Americas were shaped, from industrialization to the changing winds of politics. And he also discovers that there may be a place for Islam in his own life, particularly as a father, even if he will never be a true believer. Original, insightful, and beautifully told, Praying to the West reveals a secret history of home and the struggle for belonging taking place in towns and cities across the Americas, and points to a better, more inclusive future for everyone.
Well, shout outs to my editor for writing that one. Summarized it better than I ever could.
That's I was,
yes, exactly. Because, I mean, if you were to ask me to describe it, I would have, I would have just gone into a transcendent, other universe and just talked for 60 minutes about what it's about. So, thanks for summarizing it.
Yes, well, there's a limited amount of time and just a lot of great things that we want to cover. So I figured let's just do it this way.
Let's hop to it.
Yes. Okay. So when I was reading the book, and I didn't read from start to finish. I wanted to let people know that they didn't have to do that. I found that I was able to just pick up any chapter and read that one and then go to a different one. When I was reading each chapter, though, I thought, wow, there was a lot of work that went into this chapter and then this book. I mean, the process was probably a few years?
Yeah, it took me about 4 years to get out that first draft, and yeah, I mean, I would say that it probably took me 3 of those 4 years just to figure out like what this book was going to be. It evolved a lot, throughout. I don't think that it is, too similar to the original conception of the book, which was much more focused on just the history, less so on contemporary experiences, and far less so on my own personal experiences.
Right, because this book is it's a research project, but also a look at what's happening right now, but then also part memoir. You're interjected into the stories as well.
Yeah, and that sort of just came about naturally. Like it wasn't my intent to make this, very first person, but as I ventured into these regions and into these mosques and found that I was not so much being welcomed as a journalist. I mean, there was that, but also being welcomed as like a Muslim brother, and being invited and sometimes expected to pray, to join communal prayers. And as I did, it just I was coming face to face with my religious upbringing, and felt like I have to be a little bit more transparent, not just with my sources, but as importantly with the readers, about what my stance is, where I've come from, And also in the process of writing this, I think my views on religion and especially on Islam changed.
Very interesting. And that does become clear as we read throughout the book. But my question was, why? Like, why would you put all of this time into like reading so much and traveling so much? And then also the internal journey that you went on. That's a tremendous amount of work. And so I was hoping you could tell us why. Why did you?
Well, I would say the personal journey was the hardest part, because I am naturally curious about history. I'm naturally curious about religions, and I like to travel. I mean, I was mainly or largely a travel writer. It's kind of hard to still call myself a travel writer, for the last almost 2 years since the pandemic. But when I started this book, I guess it's kind of like, everything looks like a nail to a hammer. When you're a travel writer, everything requires you to get on a plane and go there. And but of course, with something like this, it is, you're dealing with some pretty sensitive topics. And so I was, I'm fully aware as a travel journalist of the pitfalls of that, of that trade, and all the things that can go wrong when you parachute into a place to just sort of like gather some ambience and color and, what to do and blah, blah, blah. And then write about it and sometimes get it completely miss the mark. And now you add the layers of these being marginalized communities. We're talking about religion. We're talking about people who are already like under scrutiny, oftentimes from the state. So there's just there was so much room for error, so much room for accidentally causing more harm instead of doing what I'm actually trying to do, which is try to, I think, neutralize Islam and normalize, the Muslim presence in the West, that it just required me to do tons and tons of research and make sure that I went in there as prepared as possible. And sometimes if I left and I came back and I started to write about the Muslim communities that I'd thought I'd researched thoroughly and felt like I didn't quite get enough, I would then get on another plane and go back there and gather what I felt was missing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just wanted to do it right. And I think that I am just one of those writers who enjoys going down a rabbit hole too. So that was part of it.
Yeah. Your journalism background certainly, stokes that, I'm sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And so how is this book different than other books written about Muslims or Islam?
Well, incredibly, there's not a lot of books written about Islamic history in the American context, or rather the context of the greater Americas. When I say America, or Americas or greater America, I'm usually talking about North, South, Central, and the Caribbean. And so you have some books about certain regions or certain communities spread across the Western Hemisphere. For example, a really great book called Servants of Allah, which is about the enslaved Muslim Africans and the very, very rich Islamic history of Muslim slaves. But there was just no attempt to kind of put it all together and show that no matter where you are on these continents, below your feet, sleeping below your feet, is Islamic history that you are probably unaware of, starting with Columbus, right? Columbus had Moors who were basically former Muslims forced to convert to Christianity, living in Spain. He had people like that on his voyage who then came to the Americas, and they spoke Arabic and they tried to communicate with the indigenous people in Arabic. So there you have the sacred words of Islam coming to the New World on the first point of contact between East and West. And people don't know that. And I think that if people did know that, it would make the Muslim presence in the West seem, for those who are genuinely, afraid of, of Muslim people or Islam, I think it would make them less afraid. And I just think it's easier to, tolerate the other when you don't feel like they're so different from you, or like their history is so different from yours. But unfortunately, a lot of people think that Muslim history in the Americas started like a generation or two ago.
Mm-hmm. And I think you said in the book that people look at Muslims as this new viral outbreak, when really, we've been here all along.
Yeah, exactly. And quite influential, like in ways that I think people don't quite appreciate. So for example, the first slave revolt was a Muslim revolt. I mean, the enslaved Muslim Africans were drawing from, spooky Sharia in order to draw basically like the rules of engagement in order to rise up against their slave masters. And there were many slave revolts that were led by Muslim people. Why this history was forgotten or lost or erased, I think that's a really good question, and this book tries to get to that as well. Who were the architects of the new world, or the modern new world, and what was it that they were so afraid of, the Muslim presence, that they would try to erase that and make sure that that did not continue in the memory of future generations.
Yeah, no, that's great. Your book really raises the awareness of all that. And I've mentioned to you before is that one of the reasons I want people to read this book is for my children, so that, they can feel like they have a history here.
Yeah. Well, may I ask you, are they third generation Canadian? Were you an immigrant? Were your parents immigrants? Grandparents?
My parents and I immaciated together.
You immigrated as well.
I was a baby. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And do you sense that as racialized and Muslim people, they don't quite feel as maybe connected or rooted in the ground as, their white peers?
Yeah. I mean, they've said things before, like that there's something different about us. And I always thought that was interesting, like that there's this idea of something that's normal, and then us that's not.
That's really relatable. I mean, I figured that out at a very, very young age. I mean, it kind of just kind of the memory of this very vivid memory came back to me probably about 5-6 years ago, before I started writing this, but when I was starting to recalibrate my focus to Islamophobia. I just remembered that when I was like 3 or 4, my mother had taken me and my brother to this portrait studio and dressed us in sort of Arabian garbs and sort of a thobe and a keffey around her head. And I don't know, well, I think I know why now, but at that time I was so embarrassed of this picture. I don't think I could ever put it into words for my mom why I was so felt so humiliated. But I took that picture out of the photo album, snuck it into my room with a pair of scissors, and I cut it in a bunch of pieces and hid it behind my bed. And then, of course, my mom, found it when she was cleaning my room. And that picture still exists taped together in the same photo album, in the same spot where I'd stolen it from. And I'd completely forgotten about that until a few years ago. And I look back at it now and it's like, obviously at a very, very young age, I did not even want to consider myself as different from my other peers. Yeah. And of course I wasn't that different, but it just felt like the differences between me and the other, boys and girls in Northern Alberta was just so enormous.
Right. And what a metaphor that you cut up the photo and yet it still exists taped
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't cut it out of you.
No, you can't. You can't. It's always a part of you. And I think, with that, like, yes, it was a symbol of my Arab heritage, which I've, had not a very complicated relationship with, and have largely been very proud of that side. But my Muslim heritage, I felt like that picture is also sort of a symbol of that, and that is something that I have really grappled with and continue to. It is a bit of a fluid thing. But definitely, I would say in my late teens, early 20s, I did try to excise that from me. And lo and behold, it is a lot more deeply rooted than I thought.
Right. As you found, traveling all over the Americas. Yeah. So what is your hope that people who read this book, what do you hope that they will take from it?
Well, a lot of things. If you want to set your clock right now and then just tell me when we've
okay, I'll
gone over
get my cane out. Yeah.
I mean, where to start? One,
how about your top
I think,
3, maybe?
Well, look, I think I mentioned one of them already. I think that knowing people's history makes it a lot harder to fear them. One of the things that that really resonated with me is I talked to this Muslim woman in Quebec City who came from Tunisia, where they couldn't were basically wearing a hijab was, if not criminalized, it was villainized. People don't realize that there are still, Muslim majority nations where I guess expressing too much Muslimness can get you it can really backfire. So she came from a place like this to Canada where she could finally feel free to wear a hijab. And of course, she lives in Quebec City, where now she is being villainized in much the same way. And she told me, I wish that they cared about my history enough to ask me about it and find out why I wear this, why this means to me, why this means something to me. So I think if you just extrapolate that to all the different communities that are, profiled in this book, my hope is that for the non-Muslim reader, or even someone who has some, maybe some hesitance over, Islam, will feel okay, I know more about their context, where they're coming from, their worldview, what their motivations are. Even for people who are fundamentalists, or what I prefer to call ultra-Orthodox Muslims, they deserve to be heard, how they came to these conclusions, what spiritually they are getting from kind of black and white views. And I think that knowing that makes it just, it neutralizes, the Islamic presence. So there's that. But then I also think that for Muslim readers, especially second generation, third generation, and on Canadian Americans who, and immigrants as well, but, those who maybe have struggled a little bit with their Muslim identity, don't feel like they adhere to the dogma enough to maybe be considered, a real Muslim, quote unquote, a real Muslim or something like that. I hope that they can realize that actually Muslim practices are quite varied. There's a lot of personal, but also scriptural interpretation on, what is and isn't halal. And that also it is completely normal for people to slip in and out of their Islamic identities. And that doesn't make you, deserving of feeling like you don't belong within your family or within your community, or that you have, somehow dishonor them or something like that. That Muslim practices are quite varied, and there is room there's always, that it has always been a bit of a discussion as well. So I guess there's that aspect as well. And then kind of coming from that, maybe this is the third thing, I'll stop here. Islam is varied. Islam is extremely diverse. I don't even think I appreciated how diverse and wide-ranging the many branches, and within those branches, the cultural inflections. I don't think I realized just how pluralistic it is. And I don't think that a lot of Muslim people do, and especially non-Muslim people don't understand it. They think it comes down to Sunni, Shia, and maybe they've heard of the Nation of Islam, maybe they've heard of the Nizari Ismailis, and they might think that it just kind of stops there. But of course it doesn't, right? Like each branch has many more branches to it, and then you bring in all the Sufi inflections, and in the end, what I hope is that when people realize just how varied it is, they stop trying to have like a concrete opinion of it, because that concrete opinion of what Islam is it good, is it bad, should it be celebrated, should it be feared, that like it just oversimplifies things. And also it contributes to this monolithic religion. And I should say, I think that a lot of Muslim people are guilty of this as well. When we talk about the Ummah, which is, the sort of global Muslim nation, it has a little bit of like a sort of a self-delusion to it that somehow 1.8 billion people have reached some sort of consensus when they haven't. It's just like even within mosques, you have so many cultural and also generational like disagreements on the way to do things. So if I could complicate people's views, I think I've done my job.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that I learned a lot. I've been Muslim for 43 years, and I can say that I learned a lot reading. I was like, oh, there's Muslims in Trinidad. Okay.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's the most largest Muslim population in the West, proportionally. Yeah.
And I had no idea.
Going back 170 years. I mean, they have mosques that are older than the oldest buildings in Edmonton.
Wow. Yeah, no, there's some really great stuff. That's probably the only sentence where they've compared Edmonton and Trinidad on anything.
Yeah,
well, that was great. So speaking of the different communities then that you profiled, how did you choose them?
Oh, man. Through various methods of alchemy, I guess. I mean, there was sort of my number one objective, which was to capture the history. And so I started with a timeline of what I saw as like important moments in Islamic history in the West, starting with, enslaved Africans. I think it probably ended with this, sort of the wave of Somali, Afghani, Syrian refugees in the last 20 years as like Muslim majority nations get torn apart. This wave of Muslim refugees are coming to the West and starting to stir up a lot of the same kind of emotions. So I think I had those at like two opposite ends. And then, as I would learn more about the history of Muslims here. So, for example, you mentioned, Muslims in the Caribbean, that sort of got on the timeline. And then, Syrian Lebanese Muslims in the Northeast U.S. in the auto factory industry and how instrumental they were to that. So I would put these all on a timeline, and then I would start to find, start to think about like what are the best regions of the world to sort of represent this little mark in time. So enslaved Africans, I could have gone, just about anywhere in the West, but Brazil, specifically Salvador, Brazil, had a pretty landmark revolt in the 1800s, a Muslim-led revolt. It's one of the best documented revolts, like slave revolts in history. Just so much rich, documentary evidence, testimony from this. So for me, I wanted to go there, not just to speak to the experts, to get sort of a historical tour, kind of a reenactment of this, but also to see how that lives in the memories of Brazilians today, specifically Black Brazilians, and whether it has any bearing on them. And I found that actually it had I done this, tried to write this 5 years ago, the answer would be no. But in the last 5 years, there's been sort of a popularizing, or rather in pop culture, a interest in Muslim revolts in the state of Bahia. So that's like one. Other ones, like, they're pretty easy. Like Dearborn is the like Muslim Arab Dearborn community comes out of the auto industry, and I found out that I had a great grandfather who also worked in that factory, the Ford factory. So, I felt like I had a personal connection to get there. And then other ones, it had not so much to do with like the history, but rather like the denomination that I wanted to just put a spotlight on. So, for example, the Ismaili, the Nizari Ismaili Muslims, who are probably, the most influential, I think I could say easily, at least in Canada. It's a very small population. I'm speaking to you like you don't know this. Of course you are. You're part of this community. Right. But it's such a small percentage, like fraction of the global population, Muslim population. But in Canada, it's about 10%. And, a lot of public figures are Ismaili. Mayor Nahid Nenshi, journalist Latif Nasser, CTV anchorman Omar Shandia. Yeah, thank you. And of course, there's that connection between Ottawa and the Aga Khan. So I felt like this has to be a chapter as well. And also, I think that I was cognizant of the fact that certain communities, if I had left them out, like I'm thinking about Ismailis, but also the Ahmadiyya. These are sects that have been, persecuted and also dismissed as illegitimate, as like not real Muslims. I felt like if I were to leave them out, I would be in a way validating that, that kind of bigotry. Mm-hmm. So I had to make sure that like they were included. Yeah. I could not possibly include every denomination, but there's probably about, half a dozen in this book.
Yeah. I think the term you were looking for is Muslim light.
Muslim light.
That's what I've heard many times.
Yeah. So, well, that's nice, because others would just say heretics.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
or kafirs, really. I mean, let's be real. There is a wing of radicals mm-hmm. who see anything that is like quote unquote innovative sees adherents of that as unbelievers, not non-believers, but unbelievers, people who know the truth but choose not to believe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's great. I thought that the 13 mosques and communities that you profiled were so unique and really did cover the spectrum. I just wondered how you came up with them, but I think it all comes together in a really great way.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And now I think we would all like to hear you read something.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So what are you going to read for us?
I'm going to read from the end. I'm going to read from the last chapter, actually. And this is a chapter called Who is Muslim? And it is about the El Tahid Juma Circle Unity Mosque, better just known as Unity Mosque, which is a part of the Inclusive Muslim Initiative. It is a not just queer friendly, but LGBTQ led and women led mosque. So this is I'll read a few minutes from the beginning of this chapter. The last thing I expected to see at Friday prayer was a bowl of packaged condoms. "Are you here for Unity Mosque?" the secretary asked. "It's in the boardroom down the hall." Of the dozens of congregations that I'd met since 2017, none were as adaptive, alternative, and radically inclusive as El Tawhid Juma Circle, better known as Unity Mosque. The prayer hall is discreet and nomadic, roving between borrowed spaces to protect its many lesbian, gay, transgender, two-spirited, and non-binary worshippers, hence why we had met inside of a community center in downtown Toronto. Other times they meet in high-rise offices, churches, conference halls, and living rooms, and sometimes it's all of those simultaneously. More a meme than a mosque, Juma Circle groups organize in 10 North American cities and inside bedrooms worldwide via Facebook Live. These Muslims in Netherlands and Pakistan, the Middle East, and the West Coast set their clocks to Toronto time, prostrating in seemingly random directions in sync toward the same speck of earth. Some of the traditions will appear foreign to them, but that's true for everyone entering the prayer space for the first time. It's a mix of so many different traditions, Muslim, Eastern, and Western traditions, and indigenous traditions, that it challenges everyone's comfort zones. Would it also challenge mine? I wondered as I turned away from the bowl of condoms toward the prayer space. Often called the gay mosque, members prefer inclusive mosque. You do not have to be queer or Muslim to join a Juma circle, but you do have to prove yourself an ally to an exclusive Facebook group with 2,000 members. Unity Mosque's co-founder, El Farouk Kaki, pointed me toward this private group before I could obtain the secret address. To access the group, I answered a questionnaire about my opinions on 3 major issues. 1. Am I comfortable with the notion of women or non-heterosexual people leading my prayer? Yes. Am I comfortable praying with mixed genders, denominations, and people who may not necessarily identify as Muslims? Definitely yes. What's my opinion on Black Lives Matter, environmental stewardship, and indigenous self-determination movements? I filled it out and applied, thinking that I may have finally met my people. But when I started to read members' comments and look at their photos, I had good reason to question that assumption. The most engaged members revealed themselves to be refugees, immigrants, and outcasts, people who may not actually prefer the Unity Mosque, but need it for safety and well-being. Stepping inside the mosque on that Friday in late February, I had a feeling that I'd be the most privileged person in the congregation, which really is not that unusual for a Canadian-born middle-class straight-passing male. Unless I met another able-bodied straight dude who was also one shade lighter than Caramel and an inch taller than Tom Cruise, I would probably be that dude. I'd likely take up more space regardless because Imam Kaki had permitted me to document the circle and meet its members. The first person I met had been in Canada barely a month. A young Swahili-speaking man, it was his first time attending, so we were equally confused about how the boardroom would transform into a mosque. There were no prayer rugs, and not all of the tables and chairs had been folded away yet. With great difficulty, he asked me if I knew what to do. "It's my first time too," I said. He seemed nervous for a host of reasons, not the least of which might be his knowledge of what would happen to him if he were ever found out in his homeland. He'd left a country where police routinely entrap gay men with online sting operations. One of the next people I met was a victim of those sting arrests, and in another country entirely. The Egyptian refugee claimant who asked to go by Ali told me that the undercover cop was surprised to learn that Ali was not a cruiser looking for sex. "I just want to marry someone who practices their religion, fasts, prays, and at the same time is LGBTQ, said Ali, who spoke and carried himself like a gentleman. The cop took pity on him. He advised Ali to deactivate and delete the dating app and hide any trace of him using it. Ali didn't listen because he wasn't committing a definable crime. There was no exchange or of request for sex, let alone money. I'm very proud of my religion as a Muslim and I'd like to get married. It's my right. Evidently, it was not his right. Because the second time Ali was entrapped, police publicly arrested and jailed him for a night of insults and beatings. His parents still don't know the real reason he's 6,000 miles away in Toronto. He won't tell them until his asylum case has been officially approved. I'll leave it there.
Wow. Yeah, you had he had a number of experiences that I read and thought, like, wow.
Me
And
me
this was,
too. I mean, it was
yeah,
wow was sort of my default thought through the whole process of researching this book.
yeah. It comes across like that. It comes out in the reader as well. That's what
Yeah,
I
thank you.
found. So, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. So, I wanted to just talk a little bit about coming face to face with Muslim identity for those of us Muslims living in the West. I think many people have shared their stories about world events usually that bring us face to face with our Muslim identity, things that appear on the news. Um, I can tell you that when I was the first time I was sort of confronted with my Muslim identities outside of like my home and my community was in my grade 7 classroom when my teacher was talking about the Gulf War,
Mm,
and that became a very uh, heated discussion a little bit.
yeah.
And that was the first time that I realized that being Muslim meant something different. Like when people were looking at me as a Muslim, they were looking at me in a different way than what I saw myself as a Muslim, if this makes sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Did kids ever ask you if you were going to get an arranged marriage?
no, kids
No.
didn't ask me that.
Okay.
No,
Did
but
adults ask you that?
no, but I'm laughing. I'm laughing a little bit inside because when I was in grade 10, my friends and I played April Fool's prank on some of the boys in our class. And the prank was that I was getting an arranged marriage. And this, like, we played this out for like a week and I would like cry in class. And yeah, and then I was talking to some of these friends like just recently and I was like, man,
Uh,
I really played up those stereotypes.
oh
Like I
man.
probably didn't
You
do
know what?
like
If you don't want to be the butt of the joke, be in
you
on the
might,
joke.
yeah, you
Yeah.
might as well.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's what it was for me, I think, is at an early age. I mean, I'm sure there were other ones, but the one that I remember, just the one that graded me the most at a very young age, was people who thought that I was like going to have an arranged marriage. And what a strange thing to think about, like a 10 or 11-year old. I remember going to Lebanon, or telling people I was going to Lebanon for a summer vacation, me and my brother. He was probably 14, I was 11. And asking, and look, kids are kids and kids are stupid. But asking like, oh, are you going to get an arranged marriage? Is that what this is about? It's like,
Kind of
I,
makes you wonder where they
weren't we
heard
just
that
playing with
from.
Ninja Turtles yesterday? Like, how do you think I'm ready for a family? Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I think it was. One of the things anyway at an early age. Yeah. But that stuff's kind of trivial compared to the ways that you have to kind of confront it as an adult, or at least as a teenager, especially if I don't know if you consider yourself having quote unquote come of age in the wake of 9/11. I certainly felt that way. I mean, I was 9/11 happened 2 days before my 16th birthday. So like I was really, at that age where I was trying to figure out who am I, what kind of a man am I going to be, while this while the biggest global event,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, since whenever, certainly of my lifetime, was just starting to unravel.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I can tell you, uh, during 9/11, I was living in a very small town in Northern Ontario, going to school there at one of the colleges there, and I was living in the basement of sort of an elderly couple, a very Christian couple. Everyone in the town is Christian, I think, except me. Um, um, and a few days after 9/11 happened, my landlady was in the kitchen, and I saw her there, and she said, um, in Julius Caesar, when they talk about the Ides of March, isn't that something that you celebrate? And I was like, the Ides of March. And I said, I think the Ides of March means mid-March. It's like I kind of remember that from English
Yeah.
class, the Ides of March. And then I said, oh, maybe you're talking about Eid, right? And then I was like, Eid is a festival. And then my voice kind of trailed off because I'm putting it all together. Like she's saying there's something to beware of, right?
Yeah.
And like they beware the Ides of March. And
That's high
it was
concept.
like super like awkward. I just
Yeah.
like slunk back to my bedroom in the basement. But that was just sort of the beginning of these kind of like, you know, that message of like, I think I'm supposed to fear you, you know?
Yeah. I would guess that you probably experienced more of it because you're browner, a lot of Lebanese people, a lot of like, Levantine Arab people are white passing. I wasn't, white passing in my small town because everybody knew that we were like a Muslim Arab family, but we'd been there a pretty long time. We owned, my family ran, one of the most, I guess, patronized restaurants in town. We were comparatively upper middle class as a result of that business. So I certainly felt like, it didn't pan out the way that I feared. Um, and, in the end, it was the indigenous people in my community and in my school who got, ridiculed or bullied or whatever the most. And I didn't feel like I really, people ask me like, oh, what was it like growing up in like a small rural, conservative Alberta town in the early years of the War on Terror, and it was fine. For me, the things really began to change in this province, like meaningfully, in the last 6 years. It was the rise of Trump, and it was the sort of the 2015 Conservative Party of Canada's just. I mean, they went full bigot, right? Like you never go full bigot, but they went full bigot in that last campaign, and that really emboldened people. And you add to that the very real concerns about ISIS-inspired attackers. I mean, people can try to downplay that as much as they want, but it happened in Edmonton and it happened 3 blocks from my house once. So if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And you add those, all together. And then, of course, the toxicity of social media, giving people an outlet, maybe kind of letting them dip their toes, I think, in kind of the public expression of their bigotry a little bit and feeling the waters a little bit, see how much support there actually is out there for their feelings. You give people all of that, and then you start to see what I started to see, which was like blunt, open, anti-Muslim behavior. So for me to like grow up in High Prairie, Alberta in the early years of the War on Terror and not feel like my religious heritage was being attacked, and then to live in Edmonton for almost 10 years and then 3 times in 1 year be like insulted by random dudes on the street, like something in the air has changed. And it's still that way. Trump might be gone, Harper might be gone, ISIS might be like a shadow of its former self, but it's still that way. There's been a heinous series of attacks, violent attacks on Muslim women in Edmonton, mostly Black Muslim women, but also someone that I months later learned was my cousin. When that is like, that's going on right now. And that's not just like one person who keeps like, getting away with it, or one hate group. These are random people, random events who are all randomly coming to the same conclusion that this woman is a threat to me and I need to put her in her place. So that's a thing. Like that is a new thing in 2021 that we have to grapple with. And I hope that in its own little way, this book will do something about that.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Yeah. I mean, at the very least, I hope that it builds some empathy for the Muslim experience. What I really wanted to do was with this is I really wanted to limit the number of non-Muslim people that got a voice in this book, because too often Muslim people are treated as kind of spectators in stories about about Western society instead of actors. And so that's what I want. I want to give them the stage.
Mm-hmm. And you dedicate your book to those who perished in the shooting at the Quebec City Grand Mosque. You listed their names. Can you talk a little bit about what impact this act of violence had on you, and then what it was like to visit the mosque?
Yeah, sure. The Quebec City Mosque shooting is, the memory of learning that is as vivid to me as 9/11. I mean, it's kind of a cliche. Where were you on 9/11? Of course, I can tell you where I was, and I can describe to you, I think, quite vividly what that was like. But for Muslim people, there are many other sort of moments like that that they will also tell you where they were. And the Quebec City Mosque, I remember I was in a hotel in Fort McMurray working on another book when that happened. And I was, shocked but not surprised. I was, I felt very startled in some ways, but also, this is going to sound petty. It's not, though. In a way, I felt like my feelings about how bad it was and where this was going were validated. Because leading up to that, so that was just days after Trump was inaugurated, and it was, I believe, 2 days after he officially signed his version of the Muslim ban. And that actually, set a series of events in motion that killed those men. In the past, in the year leading up to that, I felt like I was looking at Trump, and I was seeing a very, I was seeing a fascist who was scapegoating immigrants and minorities and racialized people, and who was highly aware that the easiest target was Muslim people. And so he really just didn't, he just didn't have any limitations to what he was willing to say about them and what that could possibly lead to. And I felt like I was kind of trying to sound these alarms to people, this sounds a lot like what was being said about Jews in Nazi Germany and Nazi Europe. And people would dismiss it, and people would say you're exaggerating. And it got to the point where I started to think that maybe I am being a bit of a Cassandra here. How maybe it's just bluster. No one's really going to take him up on this, right? But then they did. Of course they did. And, people said this Muslim ban thing will never happen. It happened. It took a few attempts, but it happened in its own sort of constitutional way. Yeah. So I think that that moment for me was like, okay, I trust your instincts. This feeling that you have about this moment, and this moment putting a target on the backs of your family, yourself, whether or not you identify as a Muslim, is here. And I think that was in a way the moment that this book started to come into fruition. That was the moment, I think, where I felt like I can't write about food and urbanism and the other stuff that I used to often write about anymore. This is going to, I need to have some purpose. And this needs to be a part of that purpose right now, because the world's changing in a scary way that makes me feel untethered, and I would rather feel tethered right now.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I don't want to end this conversation at all, but we're coming close to that point. And we do have a comment from David in the chat, or it's a question. He's asking if you've seen the documentary Sarin AIDS. Can you see the question there? Sex, Revolution, and Islam.
No, I haven't. Sounds great. A great title.
Thanks for the link.
All right. Thanks, man.
Yeah. I just wanted to say one more thing. That one of your quotes really, really spoke to me. And I just wanted to share it and encourage readers to pick up your book so they can read more of your words. But when you said, I'm compelled to reclaim the thing that makes me a target.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was, that really spoke to me. As a writer, as well as a Muslim. Like, it's like, well, I think, I don't know if you feel this way, but as a writer, I feel like one of the ways I can reclaim this thing that makes me a target is to talk about it, is to write about it.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to say I feel that.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that I felt a lot, like I felt it much sooner than I really understood it. You know, I felt it, and I think I was responding to it in that I was changing the entire direction of my writing focus, of my journalistic focus. But I didn't really have words for what it was that I was doing. And I think I realized in the process of writing this book that I was actually reclaiming my Muslim heritage, less an act of faith or piety, more in a way as a political act, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I spoke to a woman named Rana Abbas Tyler in Dearborn, who had not really been practicing her faith for a very long time, but you know, in these last few years felt like, no, I'm going to reclaim what it means to be a Muslim in a way that works for me and makes me feel satisfied with, with my identity. And I want to get up in your, I think what she said was, I want to kind of get up in your face and screw up your worldview of what a Muslim woman looks like. And I think there was a little bit of that in me as well, both to the, anti-Muslim racists, who would put a target on me, try to dehumanize me because of my, Muslim upbringing, or just because I look like a Muslim or have a Muslim name. Mm-hmm. But also, I think I don't meet these people IRL very much, but I know they exist online. Also the fundamentalists or the puritanical, ultra-conservative Muslims who would try to tell me that I don't deserve to call myself a Muslim, as well as so many other people, maybe even yourself, because of X, Y, and Z. So to me, reclaiming it is a bit of an act of defiance. Mm-hmm. And that's the truth. And people might say that's superficial, and that's fine. There's certainly a case to be made for that. That's certainly a valid argument. But this is how I feel. This is what works for me.
Yeah. No, I think that's wonderful. I think that's a great way to kind of inspire more people to pick up your book.
Thank you.
Because I think a lot of people are on a journey. And as you mentioned in the book and in our conversation, that we all, or many people, slip in and out of it. And I think, in my opinion, that's part of the human experience. And I think those of us who share about it and write about it, it's not an easy thing to do. And I commend you for putting it out there. And and so
thanks for asking such great questions. I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Yeah, it was really great. And I'm sure that we'll have more opportunities to talk in the future.
And I appreciate you sharing a little bit about yourself too.
Yeah, I tried to hold back, but I like talking too. I'm a sharer. But yes, for those of you who are listening, if you'd like to purchase a copy of Praying to the West, please visit our official bookseller, Iron Dog Books. Their website is in the chat. Don't forget to enter the giveaway. Our secret word for this event is identity. There's lots of stuff popping up in the chat of things that you can take a look at. Thank you again to all the staff and volunteers at Word Vancouver for making this possible. And thank you, Omar, for kicking off your book tour with us. And
thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Good luck on the rest of it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.